many non-IP, that means intellectual property uses for provisionals. Hello and welcome back to Invent Anything. In this episode, we're going to cover a comprehensive look at provisional patent applications to explore their origins, a little bit about the history and how people use them, but moving into things like the modern ways of using these provisionals for prototypes, materials, for compliance testing, and all sorts of different tools for innovators. We'll also discuss how provisionals are used to boost the company's valuations, how they can make use of AI in transforming these provisionals into all sorts of other things like automating tasks, creating printed circuit boards, linking crowdsourced solutions. So whether you're focused on product development, prototype development, etc., these provisionals can help you in the future for many different uses, and we'll cover that. This is John Cronin here at Invent Anything.
Inventions keep the world spinning. From fire and the wheel to today's high-tech, inventions power change. Turn your inventions into reality. Learn how to get your ideas to market. This is Invent Anything with John Cronin.
Today we'll cover 6 different topics: the history of and the standard uses for provisionals. That's a base setting. We'll also cover some general non-basic intellectual property uses and the evolution of provisionals. We'll also cover in topic 3 how provisionals are used in R&D and prototyping. We'll also talk about in topic number 4, provisionals and how they help in financial aspects. We'll also talk in topic number 5 and focus really in on how provisionals help to develop products from those prototypes. And then finally, we'll take a look at, in topic number 6, the future of non-intellectual property uses for provisionals and how AI is going to affect that. Now, I have done a number of podcasts before where provisionals have mentioned and many strategies, and I have done some podcasts on provisionals by themselves, but this is going to be clearly different. This is going to generally cover the use of provisionals for business and for development, but it's going to cover a whole bunch of new kind of thinking about the evolution of provisionals and how they're used and are being used today and the future. So I hope you stay tuned. The audience that we're kind of looking for here is for those that might be determining whether they should invest on putting some time and effort and money into developing provisionals. I want to show the other uses that you might not consider. We also want audiences who might want to maximize their return for the money and the time they might spend on provisionals. We also want to deal with maybe the audience who may be interested in the history of provisionals, but also where it is today and the future. I think it's fascinating. For those who management or supervisory levels who maybe want to get a handle on what a provisional is and what else it could be used for in your business. There's clearly, we think, an audience need for those who want to understand the connection between provisionals and R&D and the business. I believe that right now provisionals are only being understood by 90% of the population that even understands that word by patent counsels and IP protection. Just the very thought of using intellectual property for provisionals is exactly what people think, but just the thought that it can be used for many other non-IP uses is novel. And also, there's so many people today trying to accelerate and automate their R&D and prototyping efforts. They may not recognize that provisionals is a really double, triple win to do that. So this is John Cronin in Invent Anything. Coming up, we'll explore the history and the evolving role of provisional patent applications. Introduced in 1995 as an effective way to secure early filing dates, provisionals have become essential tools now for startups and large companies and for patent counsel. We'll cover the standard uses and dive right into the creative strategies like rolling provisionals, maintaining patent pending status, using provisionals to transition trade secrets into patents. And whether you're protecting innovation or managing risk, provisionals may play a crucial role in shaping the modern use of provisionals in your IP strategy and non-IP uses. So don't miss it. So let's hit topic number 1, the history of and the standard uses for provisionals. It turns out that in 1995, provisional patent applications were introduced by the United States Patent Office as part of sort of an agreement to simplify and help inventors as a low-cost way to secure an early filing date. Then what happened is that the provisional applications really set off with their primary goal of acting as a placeholder, giving the inventors 12 months to further refine or develop their inventions and then file a formal patent. Of course, if you don't file within 12 months, you lose the date. Provisionals are confidential, so they're not even laid open. So they're a key tool for maintaining that early filing date. Prior to this, some people went as far as writing their idea down, putting it in an envelope to themselves with a postage stamp where they could prove that this was their idea and techniques like that. But provisionals now are the modern way to do that. The third thing is that there are key differences of provisionals from utility patents. Unlike a utility patent, which is a formal patent that gets issued, provisional applications are not examined by the patent office and do not result in a patent unless you follow up with a formal utility application within the 12 months. So that means you can pretty much file anything as a provisional. So there's a wide variation about the quality of provisionals. Provisionals should have enough robustness in the specification that if you file the patent based upon the provisional, that you can use the provisional date. A lot of people make the mistake of filing some very minor provisional and then file a patent a year later, thinking that they can secure the date of the provisional filing, to find out that this provisional was so weak that they can only, have the date of the patent versus the date of the provisional. It's a pretty big mistake, actually. So seek patent counsel or experts on this. Another thing about provisionals is its early adoption became very popular because it quickly was something that individual inventors could do and startups could do as a very cost-effective way. You don't need to be a patent attorney really or patent agent to file a provisional. I would suggest, of course, you use patent counsel or experts to do it. But for $150 for a small entity, if you figure out how to fill out the form and send it to the patent office, you've got your first date. Another thing that was found is that there became strategic uses for this provisional application, because once you file the provisional, you can claim patent pending, and you get the ability to, disclose the patent later on. So that's a really important aspect of this. Another thing about provisionals in the sort of history is that they are a very good way to protect innovation, meaning you could file a first provisional on some aspect of your invention, then improve your invention some more, and file a second and a third and a fourth, all for low cost. So a lot of times people were waiting for their final product before they file their patent. Here, provisionals, because it's so low cost and easy to submit, gives you the ability to capture innovation as it's occurring. In the American Invents Act of 2011, the American Invents Act sort of strengthened the first to file system in the US. And this had the repercussions of making provisionals even more important. It's not only first to file, but your provisional is cheap to be that first filing document. A lot of basic usage today is using provisional applications across industries. They're heavily used in R&D. They're used by tech and pharma, and they're used by a lot of early stage development. One of the common misconceptions of provisionals, though, is that many believe that provisional applications automatically are going to secure their product that they're filing, or their prototype that they're filing a provisional on. No, you have to get the patent in order to do that. But you can use patent pending status, which is great. So there are many people that file a provisional just for that patent pending status. And finally, one of the things about provisionals is that it helps with increasing global influence, meaning that this U.S. mechanism is a really useful way of developing a provisional, which then later can be helped to adopt for early filing in other countries. So this provisional is really a very useful tool in business. Well, that's the first topic, but let's move into sort of the reason for this podcast, and that is some general non-IP basic uses for provisionals. Now, what do I mean by that, non-IP? Well, you're filing provisionals to protect your IP so that later on you can get a patent to stop somebody else from making, using, or selling. But things like non-IP uses would be things that have to do with the business, or things that have to do with R&D, or things that might have to do with financing, or HR issues, etc. So we can cover off some of those in this section before we really get into some of the real evolutionary directions of provisionals. So first of all, as I mentioned, provisionals are great for startups to secure the date, and they can really be used as a business tool to pass the cost on to investors. One of our key strategies for early stage companies is file the provisionals because they're cheap enough for you to do, but maybe file 5 or 6 or 10 or 8 of them. But then when you file those, you can prove to the investors that they're filed, but then ask the investor for more funding to actually spend the money on the patents, which could cost $10,000 to $15,000 per U.S. patent application. So it's a great way to kind of have a placeholder and leverage the discussion for investors. Another thing that's used as a non-IP use is they're a great strategy for larger companies to take a bet, meaning large companies do spend a lot of money on filing patents, but now this new mechanism allows them to have a placeholder for very low cost. Even though their filing fees for provisionals are a little bit higher, it's still much less than having a patent filed. Also, provisionals can be filed so much more quickly to secure the date than a formal patent. So large companies are using them sort of taking bets. Another sort of non-IP use is using this patent pending to stop copycats. And you can even have something called a rolling provisional, which is after the provisional is filed for, say, 10 months, refile the exact same provisional, rolling it, if you will. So now you've secured the date all over again. You don't get the earlier date, but you get the new date. And a lot of times, the innovation hasn't made it to market with its prior art. So consider a rolling provisional as a way to continue the patent pending. You could file a provisional even if there is prior art, because you could continue to have rolling provisionals saying that there's patent pending all the time, independent of prior art, because there's no requirement for a provisional to have a prior art search. Another strategy for provisionals is by patent counsel. This allows patent counsel to work with their clients to get in the game. A lot of times clients won't want to spend the money for a patent. They'll think twice about it. But we find that patent counsels and patent agents and even consulting companies like myself can help early stage companies sort of get in the game because the provisional is much lower costs. Another thing is that we've all heard of sort of the back of the napkin strategy. You have an idea, writing it at the back of a napkin at a restaurant. Well, provisionals are a lot like that. I mean, there's some pluses and minuses here. The napkin doesn't cost you anything, and you just keep it to remember your own idea. The provisional does cost something and does require some time, but it's a more formal way of protecting your idea. So it's really an enhanced back of the napkin strategy, I think. Another thing about non-business uses, non-IP uses for provisionals is a lot of people would have what I would call the, quote, thesis strategy, which is to take your thesis in college or just take a huge amount of documentation and file that, not even thinking about the invention, just knowing that it's going to be confidential until laid open if your patent issues on it. But a lot of people will just add a lot of subject matter to the provisional where they don't have to think much about what the actual invention is. They feel that later on they can figure that out. Another area is the use of sort of what I'll call the product manual strategy. And that is to take all the documentation of your product, combine it in a document, file that as a provisional. With the idea being that if you ever want to file a patent on the product, you'll absolutely have enough information. Now, both the thesis strategy and the user manual strategy basically certainly work for making sure you have enough subject matter for a later filing. However, the danger is that you disclose too much because the actual provisional that you're going to rely on for the patent, if your claim is only 5% of that provisional application specification, you're required to publish the whole provisional application. And that then means you're giving away a lot of subject matter. Another sort of non-IP use is using it as a competitive blocking tool. See, some companies will file what I'll call defensive provisionals, which are inventions that they may want to file a provisional and then lay them open and use them as prior art against other competitors. So this is, we do have a number of podcasts on enabled publications and defensive publications, and using provisionals to help you do this is an effective strategy. One thing that we've also found is that the non-IP patent use of provisionals is that it's the beginning of what might be called a trade secret. You could file provisionals and sort of guard the idea to potentially get a patent, but if you decide not to get a patent, you keep the document confidential, and that becomes the beginning of sort of a trade secret trail. And if you've got to protect your trade secrets, documentation is everything. I have a podcast on trade secrets and how to use them and leverage them you might want to take a look at. But certainly using provisionals as trade secrets is a valid strategy. And finally, the last area that I'll talk about, although there are many of them, non-IP uses for provisionals, is use it as a patent portfolio management tool. That is, provisionals are used by corporations to build large IP portfolios efficiently because as they file provisionals, they can come back and group, say, 5 together in one patent application. So the ability to continue to file provisionals is extremely useful than trying to have a much more detailed strategy of collecting all sorts of ideas over time and then later on figuring out what's the most important to patent. Here, they're actually capturing the date as they're inventing and determining which provisionals that will combine together for a patent. In one company, we filed about 150 provisionals within about a 3 or 4 month period to own the prior art of the space. So we can mix and match now all sorts of subject matter for all sorts of future patents. So this idea of patent management tools as a non-IP use is a great strategy. So let's talk about what's coming up in the next part of the podcast. We're going to explore how provisional patent applications play a vital role both in R&D and for your business. We're going to discuss how provisionals are used to document prototypes, how they're used to separate inventor contributions, how they can outline future variations of products that might not yet be fully developed. We're going to talk about the financial side of this, where provisionals are more than just some legal placeholder, how they can increase companies' valuations or attract investors, how they can serve as assets for licensing or mergers or partnerships. So whether you're refining your invention for a better prototype or lab or R&D, or whether you're using it for business partnership or growth, this next section is for you. So let's hit topic number 3, provisionals and R&D. So when I started thinking about doing a podcast, I started thinking about a lot of the clients that I serve and how they're using provisionals. But then we have discussions about how the provisionals can then be used to help them along the road for R&D. And I got to thinking, provisionals have really changed since I started using them in 1995. They were just used for intellectual property securing the date. But now I found the use for many businesses to help weave through provisionals and R&D together, doing some R&D to get a provisional, doing some more R&D to get another provisional, or using provisional somehow to document the R&D to then use that provisional documentation for many other uses. So I'm sure you'll appreciate this section, and I hope that if you're sitting on the fence as to whether or not do a provisional, this section will really start to change your thinking. So one of the things about provisionals is that the use of provisionals is really a pre-documentation of the product or prototype. So to think about it, you're laying out a flow chart for software, you're laying out a hardware design for a circuit, or you're building some sort of process to make some composition of matter. You might do that on the whiteboard, correct? You might actually bring the staff together and build some PowerPoints, and you might put together a document to show management. You know, it's more than your engineering notebook these days, right? That you're laying out your plan. Well, provisionals look exactly like that. They lay out the front end, the background. They are the flow charts. They are the process steps of the recipe. They are the hardware design with definitions and descriptions of how it all interweaves. So the discipline of filing provisional is a lot like that pre-document. So why not use the provisional application as a pre-document for prototyping or R&D, but you also have the provisional to file. Another thing is that the use of provisionals as an engineering notebook has sort of come up. We used to talk about engineering notebooks quite a bit. And what I've found is we don't talk about engineering notebooks at all. Engineering notebooks were those things that were used by people in the lab to document what they do. Now what I find is after a week in the lab, people will write up a provisional. So it becomes the engineering notebook of our future. Another thing about the use of provisionals is to work out in more detail sort of thoughts that you might have on the whiteboard or thoughts that you might have in discussion with the team on user interfaces for, say, a software product. As a matter of fact, the whole idea of a provisional is to methodically go through the steps of the flow chart, explain which element of the flow chart is and how it operates and how it connects to the data structures and the APIs and all that. So that discipline would be, by definition, something you can hand over to a software developer. Another thing is the provisionals can do the same thing for hardware, that you basically are designing sketches of the hardware, whether it's a mechanical apparatus or whether it's a circuit or whatever. That discipline of designing it, labeling things, numbering things, talking about each idea in the design, how it operates into the integration of it, That's sort of the rigor of a provisional, which also then could turn into hiring somebody to build a prototype. Another thing about the use of provisionals is that for R&D is that they can be used for really defining composition of matter. We're doing this a lot right now, where we're talking to the clients about the variations of the compositions of what they're trying to create, whether it's a food item or some other composition for some industrial product. By simply designing sort of the tables of one ingredient versus another, or all the ways the composition can be built, the discipline of putting it in a provisional helps management understand the direction. And at the same time, they can file a provisional. Well, the nice thing about provisionals in R&D is that once you file or create a provisional, you can use it to communicate to vendors or team members. So you're not only securing the rights, but you now have a way of showing a vendor or some partner. And the other thing it does is by showing them a provisional, kind of puts them on notice that you actually have an invention filed. So they can't copy it. Another thing is that if you have a business method, provisionals are a wonderful way of locking in that business method as a flowchart and then being able to communicate it. Another thing about provisionals is they document many different potential use cases. So not only do you have the basic invention, but you can put in the provisional numerous applications, product applications. And what that does is now broaden the provisional towards different markets, which then is building the business case for the prototype or the R&D you're doing. So provisionals have this use of sort of taking the basic thing that you're working on in the lab and then expanding it out to future markets and then communicating that with a provisional. Well, the nice things about provisionals from a non-IP use as well is that if you have this discipline, you're formally actually extracting inventor contribution. Who is developing what part of the R&D? And then finally, the use of provisionals to cover variations where you don't have the time to develop the stuff in the laboratory is very important. So using provisionals as kind of that virtual innovation becomes yet another powerful use for provisionals on the non-IP use of provisionals. There's so many good things about using provisionals this way. I could go on, but I'm going to switch to the next topic, topic number 4, which is how provisionals are used for financial aspects of the business. And for businessmen and CEOs and for board of directors, et cetera, this really is for you. So we're going to kind of cover the highlights of how provisionals can be used for financial aspects. So one of the great things about provisionals is once you file a provisional, you have the potential of owning that date, and that should go towards increasing the valuation of companies that for investors. So if an investor looks at your company and you're trying to say that you have innovation, if you have patents, that's great. You can support it. But if you don't, you know, it's just telling investors what you're going to do, not what you have done. Filing provisionals, which can be absolutely very quick and very low cost, actually to investors appears to be the same thing. So you can improve that valuation discussion by filing provisionals. Another thing about filing provisionals is they're proven to be a cost-effective method to secure this IP early, and they're a lower-cost option than patents. So you could have 20 provisionals at the cost of, say, 5 patents or 4 patents and cover off more space in that early sort of mushy direction of the company where it may change. Also, the use of provisionals is very important when you're trying to attract private equity venture capital for funding, because they're more apt to fund more innovative companies, and provisionals become kind of like the stamp of approval that you've taken seriously your IP. One of the things about provisionals is a great tool for helping you secure grants and contracts. A lot of times, responding to an RFI, request for information, or an RFQ, request for a quote, you kind of always get concerned whether you're giving away too much. Well, if you file provisionals and put those provisional applications in the grant or the RFQ or RFI, that says a bunch of things. It says that you own it, and it also says that it's proprietary and novel. Another thing about the use of provisionals is they can create licensing opportunities, believe it or not. There's so many cases where a client will come to us, they have 2 or 3 patents, and they want to license it. And what we find is that the improvements of the technology is going to be more needed by the licensee than the actual patents themselves. We file some improvements through provisionals, and then we can sell or license the original patents plus the enhanced improvements of the provisional. It's a real winning strategy for increasing the monetization for licensing. Same is true for M&A. Provisionals are used to secure futures of the acquisition target to the acquired company, meaning that if you're the target of an acquisition, you look at the acquiring company and you write provisionals which connect you to that acquiring company, thus increasing your value in discussion. A lot of companies that acquiring companies come in and really try to learn a lot about a company, maybe trying to get their trade secrets. Filing provisionals is great because they can't take the trade secrets now. Another use of provisionals is to reduce legal risks. Filing provisionals early on can get you to the point where every time you file one, you're reducing the risk of litigation because you have the provisional file that you could get the patent where somebody else doesn't. So it's a great legal defense, very low cost. Gives you freedom to operate, if you will. And we have a number of podcasts on freedom to operate and evidence of use that you can take a look at the details of that. Another part of the non-IP use and financial benefits of provisionals is it's a early tool for dealing with the costly utility patent. So filing provisionals, I've mentioned several times, is much lower cost than filing patents. What that allows you to do is defer costs, almost like any bill you have, paying the minimum. Deferring the cost of owning the IP is very important. Another thing about provisionals is that they can help secure partnerships and joint ventures. There are many clients that we work with that they have a discussion with the partner, or some vendor or some customer, and they come back and they recognize they may have said too much, and they work with us to immediately file a provisional to make sure that they own what they just told the customer or vendor. And then finally, the last area is to use provisionals as an IP asset for financial reporting. Even though it's hard, GAAP rules, accounting principles, and income statements and balance sheets are very difficult to sort of understand how to value IP. And a lot of CFOs don't want to put IP down for a specific value because that kind of becomes a lock to, if you ever try to sue somebody for that IP, that statements and financials may be a limitation. But we found that CFOs would love to have a list of the assets to at least explain to the board. So CFOs could show in the first board meeting the assets, but the second board meeting they could show there's now some potential assets because 5 provisionals were filed, and maybe the third board meeting there's now 10 provisionals filed. So CFOs can start to really get a handle on on intellectual property assets. I could go on and on about the financial aspects of the use of provisionals as well as what I just talked about R&D, but we'll kind of move on. So coming up in our last section here is to explore how provisional patent applications are transforming product development and prototyping, specifically in looking at the future ways about how products and prototypes will be developed. We're going to dive right into how provisionals are applications serve as the hardware designs, their virtual prototypes, they integrate seamlessly into a company's stage gate processes, and we'll also start taking a look at the future of how provisionals are going to interact with AI. We're doing a lot of that at IP Capital's consulting firm that I run, using AI to help automating tasks. We're using and thinking about how to use software patents and software provisionals to automatically generate the software programs. We're figuring out now how to use provisionals to automatically generate Gerber files for printed circuit boards. We're figuring out how to use provisionals to hire experts and to create mechanical Turks and all sorts of things. This last part is really for you to sort of get an idea that if you get in this game of filing provisionals as a non-IP use to help your business, help your prototyping, help your R&D efforts, help your financials aspects, there's a really bright future ahead of using provisionals when you start combining the AI aspects, the large language models, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes, and all the rest of this AI to this domain of provisionals, because provisionals are a very useful, very strict way of writing something up. Your intellectual assets is a small corpus of data that can be then leveraged in so many different ways. So stay tuned for this last section. So let's jump into topic number 5, provisionals for prototypes and products. I've talked about this in topic number 2 a bit, but I wanted to focus in on this more specifically to give more sort of a technical discussion of this, if you will. So the first of all is that provisionals document the hardware design. There's no question that when I write provisionals or my staff does or patent counsels do or you do, that you're documenting hardware design. And by that, I mean, if you have a particular hardware invention, you might take some pictures of it or a CAD drawing of it, even a handwritten drawing. You're pointing to various aspects, giving it numbers, you then taking those numbers and calling it something. Then you're defining that thing, you're calling it, etc. You're talking about how the parts of the hardware come together, whether they're mechanical parts or circuit design parts or whatever. And that's really required for a patent application, but it's also really required for hardware document design. In essence, if you look at any hardware document design, you'd ask yourself the question, if you just reconfigured it, it would be a great provisional. On the other hand, if you take a provisional, you can quickly reconfigure it to become a hardware product design. So sort of think about that the hardware design is the product, is a provisional of the product, where the provisional can easily be converted to the hardware design. As soon as you start getting that idea, you recognize that you're continually innovating. By the way, any product design is usually an improvement of any other product design, so there's always novelty. Another thing about provisionals is that you don't have to have the physical hardware to be built. You can start to lay out what I'd call virtual prototype. Now, this is important because you're kind of planning for future prototypes. So why not use the rigor of hardware design, which can convert into a provisional, to use that same rigor to develop a virtual product that's not yet being built, to essentially see what that will look like, work through the details of it, if you will. Another thing about provisionals is they can more perfectly feed into company stage gate processes. Now, if you're a small company, you might not know what stage gate is. If you're a larger company, you certainly do. It's a set of gates that you use in your innovation process where very early on you're considering ideas in stage one, and there might be certain criteria and filters to get to stage two, where you may decide to fund it for prototyping. Then there could be stage three, where you're actually looking from early data, etc. Different stages of development that will be measured by management to see how quickly a product is moving from stage one to stage five into manufacturing, etc. So when you have provisional filings at any one of these stages, they help us clearly define sort of the technical sort of snapshot of where you are in the stage gate of that product. At the same time, you're getting the potential for patent protection. Another thing about provisionals is they can serve as a record of material selection. So many prototypes, when you start to design them, at some point you have to sit down and order the component parts. If you've ever built a circuit or ever built something, you'd recognize that the game is not done when you draw the drawing. Someone's going to get on and start searching the web or talking to vendors to get the parts in place, and then they have to be ordered, etc. You might not recognize this, but it's very easy to take a provisional, if it's written correctly, and get the parts list out. And then that part list becomes the to-do list for the ordering. So think about provisionals as a material selection. Another thing about provisionals is it can document compliance and testing. This is a big one. For some products, of course, they have to be safe. For some products, they have to be, consumer safe. For some products, they have to be environmentally safe. For some products, they have to be regulated by some other area. And it's kind of interesting when you're writing a provisional with just a small deviation of the description, starting to talk about compliance, that provisional becomes a compliance document or the early one of it. It's even better than a compliance document because the provisional has sort of the rationale or reasonings behind or the justification of the compliance. So think about it as an early compliance document or how it feeds that. Another thing about provisionals is it can be used, and I use this a lot, to bring in experts that might want to help with different parts of the design. I want an expert to do a certain thing of my design for my prototype, but the provisional might serve as to give them a total view of what's going on. So when you're writing up the provisional, it can be kind of the workflow for a crowd person to come in and help you with a particular part of it. Another thing is that by bringing in experts, the provisional is great because it shows the ownership. So it helps with the non-disclosure part of it. Another thing about provisionals is it can be used even for the hiring of these experts. Literally from the provisional, you could kind of write a little AI prompt to find out the kind of experts you would need to hire to build this provisional. So that's another wonderful benefit of filing a provisional or making a provisional. Another thing about provisionals is it can be used to cover very specific designs, specs, and even analysis. I find myself and my team many times analyzing features of prototypes to help figure out what we can patent. But that same analysis can be used to drive the sort of engineering design questions and meetings. So think about the provisional as just another way to store and to lock in and to kind of, organize, if you will, the various analysis features of your design. Another thing is provisional documents can be either fed from, or in the next one, fed to automatically the business documents. So if you have like a business plan, the business plan can feed directly into the kind of provisionals you're going to need for the design of the prototype or the hardware or the software. On the other hand, that same set of provisionals, if you had a number of them, could be then grouped and fed back into a business plan. In terms of the technical, every business plan, right, has a business market, product, technology aspects. It's that product and technology aspects that can either be fed from or fed to the business plan. So, boy, there's just such a lot of great uses for provisionals when you want to start considering them as ways to drive prototypes or products. So let's get into our last topic, the fun part, the future of provisionals for non-IP uses. The more and more we started working on this, the more and more we're using it. And one of our managers, Seth Cronin, just wrote a wonderful paper on how provisionals and AI interact, which you might take a look at on our website. But the first thing is, think about AI as an intern that you can give it jobs to be done. But now think about AI in terms of helping you document the provisional, filling in aspects of it. The right set of prompts can get you really close to some very good structure for writing a provisional. Then sort of think about AI to help automatically size the operability issues. What seems to be the easiest thing to make work in the provisional? What are some of the questions in the provisional? Using that intern, that expert intern, to throw ideas back and forth. Next, think about using AI to actually create the code of a software, to run sort of early versions of it. These AI engines, large language models, can really be asked to write code for you, given sort of a provisional input. Think about the same thing, but instead of the software output, think about asking it to create circuits that then create Gerber files, which are the predecessor to a printed circuit board. Although very early in use, we can absolutely see this happening. Think about an AI agent that is not only either creating the software or the hardware prototype virtually. Think about it as not being able to go out and get experts, and think about it as giving you a list of all the things that need to be done, which in essence can become an AI mechanical Turk agent of itself. In other words, it's a set of agents of AI bots that be concatenated together to create an overall product. That's actually not that far away from actually happening. So it takes mechanical Turks, and with AI and provisionals, puts this on steroids. Think about AI then helping create the R&D and product plan about, from the provisional, how this thing will actually stage in to actually a real product. Think about how the AI agent can write the user manual from the provisional. Think about how an AI agent can literally help look at any subcomponents or any modules, and to maybe go out into the internet to find what I call integrated components. In one project, that's a very complex design of a circuit. Instead of ordering all the components, we can use AI agents to look at certain parts of the circuit and say, for this part of the circuit, you don't have to build it. You can just buy this component group off of Amazon. So it's an amazing thing that you could do with AI agents and provisionals to essentially get the design built faster. A lot of circuits don't need to be broken down into transistors and capacitors and resistors. They could just be bought modules from Alibaba or DigiKey or Mouser or Amazon. Same is true of software. What modules are already open sourced and out there? Same is true of composition of matter or industrial products. And another way to look at the sort of the AI use is the sort of automatically finding services of support to help you to essentially build the product. You can use AI agents and provisionals almost together as a way of doing a lot of virtual R&D. And then from that, getting designs locked in for the business plan, and then getting things to actually happen. Think about AI agent as 500 free interns. Anyway, let me talk about a quick history snapshot. Long time ago, back in my days at IBM, 1980, 81, when we were working on CAD programs for developing semiconductors, there was a sort of discussion of, how we're starting to take, physical things like chips and trying to turn them into sort of virtual things like the design. And by working on the virtual design, you could then use the virtual design to create a better physical output. Now what's happening with AI is sort of the opposite, is you're taking the virtual design and using it to create the physical design. Just like 3D printing today, you can render it in CAD and then print it. AI with provisionals can be used to take any virtual design and now cast it into the world of physical reality. So what a wonderful thing is that the physical becomes the virtual, and the virtual becomes the physical, and this becomes a virtuous cycle now. What a wonderful way to sort of think about it. So let's kind of wrap up. In the first topic, I talked about the history of standard uses of provisionals, everything from 1995, how it started as a low-cost way, talked about it being a utility patent provisional holder, talked about it being a very flexible, cost-effective thing for startups, talked about it being used by heavy industries as well, R&D, and then the American Invents Act comes along in 2011, reinforcing the importance of provisionals and having the ability to sort of get onto the global stage of filing. Sort of basic background of provisionals. And of course, we have a lot of different podcasts on various aspects of this. In topic number 2, we talked about some first basic non-IP uses for provisionals. Things like not only getting the earlier filing date, but using it to reduce risks. So using it to attract investors. Talked about rolling provisionals. We talked about how to do this to have patent counsel sort of get in the game, so to speak. We talked about back of the napkin, the thesis strategy, the user manual strategy. We talked about how it transitions you to trade secrets. And we even talked about how this can be used as a patent management tool for companies. In topic number 3, we then moved to sort of very basic how provisionals and R&D are tied together. We talked about how pre-documenting products or prototypes or hardware designs. We talked about moving this provisional from the engineering notebook. We talked about how this sort of takes over testing and verification of experiments. We talked about how you can work out your user interface or your hardware interactions with provisionals. We even talked about how to facilitate communications with vendors or team members, outline business methods, things like that. We also talked about how this sort of separates out inventor issues and contributions and covering future variations. In topic number 4, we talked about how provisionals are related to financial aspects of business. We talked about how it's useful for enhancing company valuations, how it's used for attracting investors, how it's secure venture capital funding. We talked about how it demonstrates an active IP strategy in a company. We even talked about how this can be used for startups to manage cash flow. We talked about using it to enhance licensing opportunities or enhance the M&A deal. We talked about how you can use it for financial reporting of CFOs or even help get grants and loans. But a lot of different things you can use with the provisionals. In topic number 5, we talked about how provisionals can be used really strongly for prototypes and for products. We talked about how we can document hardware designs and material selections and how ensuring the rigor of a patent application. We talked about how provisionals become virtual prototypes, how they can feed in the stage gate. We talked about how provisionals can be the early compliance and testing procedures. We talked about how provisionals can be used for deeper analysis, tying that analysis to the overall product or prototype. We talked about provisionals, how they can even help by bringing in external experts, covering the NDA and inventor issues. And we talked about how the provisionals can automatically either feed to or feed from business documents. When the business plan is business, market, product, and technology, the provisionals can feed into or out of that section of the business plan. Finally, we talked about the fun stuff, how the future of AI and provisionals come together. We talked about how the AI can act as an intern to help you develop the provisional. We talked about how the AI can be used to size operability issues. We talked about how AI can either create virtual code or run actual code, how it create the Gerber files for printed circuit boards, how it can create user manuals, how it can be used to set up mechanical Turks. We even talked about how it can be used to figure out subcomponents of your design, so you don't have to build those subcomponents. There's so many different AI features when you start locking provisionals with AI together. And we even talked about the sort of historical snapshot of how we went from physical to virtual and back to physical, using the AI with provisionals to help us get from that virtual back to the physical world. Much like CAD programs are used for 3D printers, these provisionals plus AI become the sort of physical printer of any reality. Well, we hope you like this. If you do, please subscribe and come join us on our blog, Invent Anything, and come listen to our new series of Inventors at Work. This is John Cronin, Invent Anything.